it's the festival of Imbolc, and Saint Bridget if you're Christian, and Briege if you're a pagan. And this is the return of the light. The return of the light from the winter is now ending as we head towards the spring equinox, and in through the spring in towards and through the spring equinox, and the birthing of lambs, the arrival of the snowdrops, the flower, and the first buds on the trees usually appear around now. But this is primarily a festival of the return of the light. Now, in a pagan sense, the light can be seen like the Roman god Lucifer. Lucifer's not the devil, Lucifer's the Roman god, and is also known as Phosphor within in the Greek pantheon. And it's the return of the light of purity, of truth, and things should get psychologically better for people from this point on. I would wager up until yesterday, many of you were tense, like you felt like a spring was winding up. It should start to relax now as we move into the light, as the brutality of the light of truth comes blazing through. Now, you know, some fascinating developments happening in the US, and you know the way I said yesterday that a pathological liar always begins with an appeal to virtue before telling the lies. Like, I'm a really good person, I'm a really wonderful person, I come from a really good family, followed by the lies they're telling about the other person. This is also done with things like credentials. I'm a scientist, I'm a doctor, and then the lie, where it should be self-evident if it's the truth. And what these people are doing is often lying to themselves. That's what they're often doing, they're lying to themselves. Because, like the Jungian thing, it's more, people will go to extraordinary lengths, even destroy themselves, rather than face the shadow of their own behavior or the consequences of their own actions. And we're seeing that all around us now with this whole Rona thing. People know that their neighbours are committing suicide, becoming alcoholics and drug addicts, that there's domestic abuse happening at home, that there's teenagers who've lost the will to live because of these lockdowns. But rather than face that, they continue to appeal to the virtue of themselves by saying things like, well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I trust the government. Well, I'm not an idiot, I didn't fall for the Q thing. Oh, I'm not a fool, I hate the Trump. But what they're finding now is that they're still as miserable right now as they were prior to, say, Trump being, no longer being president or anything. They're just as miserable. And in some ways, they're even more miserable because they were psychologically expecting some kind of elevation when these things will happen. And when they happen, it's complete disappointment because nothing has changed. Their lives are still shit. And so therefore, the media has to give them something now to grasp onto, to hate and things like this. So there was a very good German cartoon yesterday where you see a girl with her face and she's fretting and she's going, I really thought my life would get better once Trump was out of office. Now I feel more empty than ever. And the guy has a reassuring hand on her shoulder saying, don't worry, the media will give us somebody else to hate soon. And that sums it all up. Now, the Jungian shadow would be to look at yourself and say, why the hell did I think my life or the world would improve by me hating or wanting Trump out of office? That's because they will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid the shadow. But if they do confront the shadow and say, why was I even bothered with that? That's a Luciferian moment. The light of purity, the light has returned. You understand this, Morgana? The light has returned. And that's when self-realization and a lot of these people are. If you look at the clock that's used to illustrate Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, these are always stuck on some point. But when they have that moment of the light returning, they can then continue on their hero's journey. But they don't. They get stuck in the past with grievances, and they get stuck in the past with things that are irrelevant to nobody but themselves, and they have to justify it by continuing telling lies to themselves more than anyone else. that they, rather than facing the fact that they fucked up, or they're stuck in a horrible toxic situation and this kind of thing. And that's how human beings are just, we've always been like this. So we've all done it in our lives. It's very easy for me to say, you to say, point a finger at someone else. This has all happened to us in different parts of our lives. But the process, you learn from it. And you say, I'll never waste that energy again. And a big part of that is like the whole no contact thing. If someone stabs you in the back, you just get rid of them. That's the end of it. Or even attempt to remotely gaslight you, get rid of them. And then you can, they don't become interruptive inhibitors in your psychic destiny as a person. Now, this is what Trump represented. He was an excuse for so many to keep themselves in a holding pattern in pathological self-annihilation on the clock at a certain time. And therefore they could blame all their problems on him. And this is usually a process of decadence too. It's usually the more you go up the economic scale, the more likely you are to find people like this, because there's so little things to worry about in their real life that they have to invent demons in the shadows. Now, yesterday, Trump is very, very active. As soon as he left office, he began this whole new thing of the former president office. He's now assembling a legal team. He wants that impeachment hearing. And this is terrifying, particularly to the politicians, because he'll be able to expose all these animals for what they are. We'll get to see what really went on behind the scenes. And this is a fascinating move. This is the classic, the type of combat that I always tell you about. If somebody attacks you, comes after you, or goes to war against you, pretend you're defeated. Go away and give them enough to pretend that you're defeated. They will then show themselves to the world as the absolute toxic, foul animals that they are. Or they'll show themselves as decent people who go, okay, enough, this has gone too far. That's a sane person. That's someone who's ready to move on. But that this way you can determine, and also it's a great way of finding out who the betrayers are. So Trump did this. He pretended he was defeated by not accepting it, by walking away from where he was without taking it too much further. And this allowed all the pathological animals to show their true colours, as well as it was a real A2 Brute moment. All the ones holding the daggers in the forum, they were all exposed. Now, this is now that he's done this, he's now in a prime position to reverse that and say to them, okay, let's do it. Let's go public. Let's see what you're hiding. And we've already found out that the Lincoln Project, which was a group of Republicans in the GOP party who were like, saying, oh, Trump brings disrepute to this party. They've basically been exposed as a pedophile grooming operation, which is not surprising because the Republican Party in the US has had a huge problem at the very top with pedophilia for the longest time. There was that famous Granada TV documentary in the 1980s. See, this is why I'm not a Republican, I'm not a conservative, I'm not a liberal, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not left, I'm not right. I'm in the middle, and I see that there's an anarchist. I'm an old-fashioned anarchist, but I'm also a kind of an active passive anarchist, if there's such a thing. That I believe if things were swung too far to the left, you have a right to move them. You should try to move them to the right, to bring adjustment to the centre. If it's moved too far to the right, you try to bring it back to the left. And this is where I am. This is where I see myself. I see politics is that people should be an adjusting force to swing things away from radicals on either end. Right now, we're way too far to the left. But back in the early 80s, this Granada documentary was pulled literally an hour and a minute before it was broadcast live on TV in the UK. And it's incredible. You can actually, it was on YouTube, but it's gone now. And it was basically showed how the Boys Town, the famous home that's sung by the Hollies, He Ate My Heavy, He's My Brother, Father Corrigan and Boys Town, was basically a pederast sex trafficking operation directly into the White House when Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. were there. Now, these are the people that this Lincoln Project were saying, were worried about, because a part of me thinks that those pedophiles were still, well, they were, it's just come out yesterday, the guy running the head of the Lincoln Project was grooming 14-year-old boys. Now, this is probably tied up with the Epstein Island thing, which has gone incredibly quiet, I might add. incredibly quiet following the Trump's the whole U.S. election thing. And that's the Clinton Foundation desperately trying to sweep it under the carpet. I mean, the thing that made me like Trump was back in 2014 when he wasn't even running for president. Somebody had said to him, "Do you think Hillary would run for president?" And he turned around and said, "I don't think it's possible what happened with Epstein Island and Bill being down there so often. What went on in Epstein Island was absolutely disgusting. And the Clintons were heavily involved in it." Now, that was before he even decided to run for president. And so he's a shrewd fucker on every level. And he's a different kind of shrewd than the deviousness you get in politics. He's more of a business shrewd, and it's more honourable because it gives people the benefit of doubt. Where politicians and civil servants just slit your throat, and that's the end of it. But he maybe I could imagine right now with him launching this office of the former president, which none of them have ridiculed. Have you noticed that? And also hiring this big shot legal team, that I'd imagine they're quaking in their boots, because if there was one thing that got people to turn on Trump, it wasn't that farcical, make you up invasion of the Capitol building. It was politicians who were probably compromised. Someone had photographs of them doing things or messages or things like that. And we got a peek into that yesterday with the head of the Lincoln Foundation grooming 14-year-old boys. So that's the tip of the iceberg. Trump wants his day in court, so the ones who were compromised, we can actually find out why they were compromised and what they were up to. And I imagine they're quaking with terror, both the Democrats and the Republicans. Of course, not the Republicans who stood behind Trump, but but the ones who didn't, I would reckon, especially the ones, see, like when you hear this guy saying, the head of the Lincoln Project, saying things like, President Trump has brought the Republicans into disrepute. Jesus Christ. The Republican Party, the ones who started the Gulf War II with the fake stories of weapons of mass destruction, all those horrible and evil neocons, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Cheney, the rest of them, Mr. Known Unknowns and Unknown Knowns, talking word salad. These people, they're the ones who brought the Republican Party into disrepute. And that's why they were just a bunch of billionaires who, the only thing the Republican Party stood for before Trump was bombing third world countries and taking their resources. That was basically all it stood for, while playing platitudes towards the Bible Belt in America about family values and all this. And now it turns out that the ones who are the main people in this are all pedophiles, or some of them have been pedophiles. I mean, this is going to get extremely interesting. Pay attention to the United States right now. We're talking about the people who assassinated the Kennedys and everything, the secret unknowns behind the Washington machine. That that any kind of attempt to reform the political machine on Capitol Hill is met with a assassination and so on, and they're very much their weapons are divide and conquer. And Trump came in there being nothing like that. And that's why this is like, you liberals, please get it into your fucking heads. The reason why people voted for Donald Trump is because he wasn't a Republican. He was a JFK type Democrat. He was no more right than him. That's all he was. And I still see him to this day, the GOP. Trump used the Republican Party as a machine he could piggyback on to drain the swamp. And he's still going to drain the swamp. He's doing it outside. Now, 2 weeks ago, they were all like hunky-dory about taking Trump down and having their impeachment hearing. And now they're all saying, oh, well, maybe it's not necessary, because they're all shitting bricks. They're all shitting bricks. It's as clear as anything. And the whole thing, again, with that Republican Lincoln Project, was so much of it was appealing to virtue. Well, the Republican Party stands for values that we represent, and President Trump doesn't. Like what? Shipping young boys out of Boys Town into the White House, bombing countries like in the Middle East and taking their resources, pandering to the worst kind of Christian lunatics in the Bible Belt, where you have the highest rates of teen pregnancy and STDs and abortion, despite all this family values garbage. That's an honourable thing. That definitely having a go at minorities and particularly African Americans. Why do you think African Americans voted for Republican, the president this time, voting for Trump in the most in our history? Because they saw tangible improvements in their lives rather than a a white wealthy Ivy League school Democrat politician who flies into town, tells them all how wonderful they are and how he really admires the writings of you know not Malcolm, I shouldn't say that, but like he'll quote a Martin Luther King speech, or some black poet or rioter who's who's famous among liberals that they like to quote their credentials, their own appeal to virtue. My favorite African American female poet, this kind of thing, and. These people saw through that. They've always seen through that. African Americans are very intelligent, astute people. They're not idiots. They're not easily fooled. And as soon as they saw Trump, they said, there's the man there's someone who's actually doing stuff." And that was working class African American folks who finally saw, hey, things have actually gotten better. The neighborhood is looking better. Well, it was until all these rich white BLM types came in and burned it down, but it was looking good before they came along. And there's a great article in the Burkean. I'll put the link below about how the one thing about these people who virtue signal that's never talked about is how it comes from a place of social status. I'm better than you. I'm better than you. The Burkean has some fantastic journalism in it. I advise you to actually, really, really look at that website. I'll put the link below. But it had a great article there about this group in Ireland who's created to fight the tide of Irish extreme right wing hate groups. There isn't any, but they had a great comment saying that the host of the show answered his own question: why is there a move to the right in Ireland? To a panel made up exclusively of government-funded NGOs, race baiters, university professors, trade unions, sitting there saying, everyone should be should be censored. It's just, this is what they're like, these people. But yeah, they had a great article called "The Unbearable Whiteness of Dalkey," the whitest town in Ireland, filled with rich liberals. Bono lives there, and all they do is have minority poetry events, slam events, and talk about how wonderful they are and how tut in working class neighborhoods they're rather racist, and yeah, it's just bang on the money. Like I did an interview recently where I pointed out that a big part of these people who these posh people who get involved in activism is to say to minorities, don't blame us, blame the working class. That's a big, blame the working class instead. And that's really what drives all these posh rich people into groups like that. Speaking of posh rich people, I'm seeing the truthers, the dumb fuckers that they always are supporting to stop this HS2 thing in England, a high-speed train line. And as usual, just like they all ran to Russell Brand, they're all running into this thing now. That thing is such a non-issue. And it's just, and all I have to do is listen to all the Tarquins and Pandoras. I think you should stop this train immediately. Well, you don't have to worry about public transport because your daddy's going to give you a Ferrari when your trust fund comes in. There's all these. They're all swarming all over. As soon as you hear those the Pandoras and the Tarquins, it's controlled opposition. And the reason why they're whipping up this whole non-issue about the HS2 thing is to distract you from the real issue of the lockdown. But of course, the truthers are so fucking dumb that every day they just immediately run into the latest controlled opposition, just like they did with the Q thing, just like they do with Russell Brand and everything. They just run straight into the control thing, and because they just want that superficial rush in between spliffs of things are going to get great, and. Yeah, so keep an eye on that whole thing. Trump is actually going to become a far more interesting character outside of it's sort of like the way, people like Styx, Hexenhammer 666 and Dave Cullen, Computing Forever, have gone to BitChute It's because they can actually really do it now. And already I saw a Sticks Hexenhammer 666 video on BitChute. It was one of the best ones he ever made, and it was really funny too when you let it rip. Trump is doing the same thing out of office. Within office, he had to maintain demarcation within certain decorum. The office, but by inventing this office of the president, former president, he is now free to basically do what he's want. He's creating a kind of a counterbalance. From what I can tell, and knowing how canny he is, and if I was him, it's what I would do, is he's creating a counterbalancing force to the Clinton Foundation. Remember, when the Clintons left office, Hillary Clinton, was so furious that she couldn't control people anymore through her husband, that the power crazed, power hungry beast that she is, she they set up this Clinton Foundation to continue controlling it. And you have like political parties here now, like Sinn Féin, are basically wings, and just about every RT reporter here on the TV station works for the Clinton Foundation, or has worked for some time. Speaking of RT, right after I made that video yesterday about the Late Late Show being a suicide machine, right after I made that video, there's all these websites all start appearing in Irish entertainment websites and stopped all this doom on the Late Late Show. It's driving us insane. Literally right after I made that video. It's so funny, but they had an article that was two articles that were extremely sinister in the last couple of days. One was a little girl who was held in detention and talking about how cute and fun it was. She was in some foreign country and they put her, I think Singapore or somewhere, and they put her in detention because she was an arrival and was portrayed as, oh, they were so nice to people in the detention centre. It was like unbelievable. It was like those videos that the Third Reich showed of what the death camps looked like before. Did you ever hear about this? Before they transported them to Auschwitz and Dachau and the other places, the Third Reich, to get the people into the camps, and also to quell fears of Germans who were like, oh, you shouldn't be putting people in camps because of their religion or anything. They made these videos where they show the camps looking like Butlins, where they're swimming pools and playing tennis and five-a-side soccer and this kind of thing. And it reminded me of that. It was like RT's version of that. Oh, it was so fun. It's so fun, like we had a wonderful time. And that's what these videos made by the Third Reich and played in Jewish communities were like, oh, this is where you're going to go in Poland. And you see a girl playing tennis and swimming and gymnastics. And then you have like the knitting circle and stuff. It's going to be wonderful. And then they get there and they're fucking making cement and eventually end up in a lime pit. But the same mentality on the RT, and there was another story on the RT website of this one was even better. It was talking about there was a sudden outbreak in some community in China, and then the full force of the Chinese lockdown came back into this community, and it was done in such a way. Well, isn't this great? Isn't this fantastic? They locked people up. They immediately started monitoring them. They were under immediate house arrest. It was wonderful how they handled it. It's really fucking disturbing how psychotic these people are. And speaking of psychotic, and I shouldn't laugh at this, but a X-ray technician in the United States who was one of these, sanctify me with your vaccine, sanctify me, put the love of COVID Christ into my arm. They're one of those types, one of these like secular scientists, religious fanatics. He got his shots, his COVID shots. He uploads the pictures to Instagram and Twitter going, I never felt so great after getting a shot. I'm so great. I got the COVID vaccine. Fucking dead a few hours later. And his wife in the article is saying things like, oh, well, people do die of reactions, but he knew the risks. And, I'm not too upset about it because he died fighting for science. So basically, in her mind, and this is how distorted and twisted people are now, where a normal wife would be saying things like, you fucking killed my husband with the Pfizer vaccine? What the fuck? Was this thing properly tested? It goes from that to being, now they're so brainwashed, the normies now, to You know, like, do you remember when they had the Ayatollah Khomeini first, when they had the war between Iran and Iraq, and the mothers used to hold up pictures that are little boys. The Ayatollah Khomeini would send little boys out as suicide bombers, and you see them, and then they would walk into Iraqi troops and blow themselves up, and then their mothers holding the pictures, going, "My son's a martyr, my son's a martyr." It was just like that. It was just right back to my Abrahamic fanaticism thing about this whole COVID thing. Bang on the money again. The wife was like, "He died for the vaccine," so he's a bet. It's somehow being killed by the Pfizer CEO is a better level of dead than dying of the COVID. Like, and again, I'm not anti-vax. I'm not anti-vax. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I know vaccines work. I don't trust a rushed vaccine. It's as simple as that. And I'll tell you why. Haste is the engine of error. This thing was rushed out. And they could say all, even though there may be well-meaning people involved in it trying to say, like, we did all the best we could, the testing was phenomenal. I don't know, especially when you see the EU now saying, you know, certain vaccines are like, no, they're not safe. For the EU to do that, and that's another thing. Nigel Farage is like acting like the EU are just being bureaucratic monsters who's stopping their people from getting a vaccine. Actually, Mr. Farage, I agree with this one. The EU basically said, we don't trust this vaccine. It's not properly tested. Maybe you should. Maybe, you know, Brexit does have its down things as well. You know, so you maybe that, you know, don't be gloating over that. Maybe you're on the wrong. And yeah, that was fascinating too. The EU said, oh no, no, these vaccines are not ready. They're not safe, and they're not going. And one of the EU health groups, the Irish government wanted to buy some dodgy vaccine off the UK, like 1 million doses or something. And the EU stopped it, saying the Irish government is not going to use their population as guinea pigs. The EU actually said that. The EU actually said the Irish government is not going to use their population as guinea pigs. And I found that quite remarkable. Now, of course, I'm not all pro-EU or anything like that. But it just goes to show you that these people, you know, who are like, sanctify me with your vaccine, they're not paying attention to some of the stories that are going out there. I also find it fascinating that two healthcare professionals, one a woman who goes on camera, a nurse, and he has the whole world watch her being injected, as well as an x-ray technician who uploads it to social media, how he's like, this is the best shot I ever got, are, you know, in ICU a few hours later, fighting for their lives. There's almost like, you know, they say that gods move in mysterious ways. But it's got to the point now that anyone who, you know, when you see the whole thing where the governments have removed indemnity from vaccine manufacturers if anything goes wrong. See, a lot of idiots don't know this. A lot of idiots are going to get in these vaccines and have reactions or die. And then they're going, I'm going to sue. And then they're going to go up to their lawyer and say, my brother dropped dead, my father dropped dead, my best friend dropped dead. We want to do something about this. The lawyer's going to go, did you not know that your government signed an indemnity form to release the vaccine companies from any kind of legal responsibility? No, I didn't know that. You see, this is like black magic again. They always tell you what they're going to do. So when it happens, you can say, I didn't know that. This is how black magic works. This is how these pathological types work. They tell you what's coming. Now, positive. We're going to finish on positive. The EU has come out and said they're not going to have a vaccine passport. It would be in violation of many countries and EU law. That's gone. They also said you don't need a vaccine to travel. What you need to be is test negative. That means you're not sick, okay? The World Health Organization has reduced the positive criteria level for positive tests to COVID-19 and reduced it significantly. So the chances of false positives now are a lot lower than they were a few months ago. Positive news, right? And finally, the Isle of Man, the little country between Ireland and Britain, has ended all restrictions today. Pubs, restaurants, a lot are open. They go down one more level. Visitors can go visit the Isle of Man. But this is fantastic. Italy is also reduced. Without the exception of Sardinia and Sicily, they have allowed opening of restaurants and pubs and things like parks and things like that again. It's things are moving in the right direction, okay, and so the light is coming in. It's coming in. So the smaller the countries, or they want the smaller countries, but they'll also they will open up in microcosms. Isle of Man, certain parts of Italy, bits of this place, that bits of that place, and Boston, by the way, has reduced the restrictions on cinemas and gyms and quite a few other places. So Boston has started opening up, and that's a major city on the east coast of the United States. Although the city itself is small, it's a huge population area around there, and yes, so positive news, okay? Not this helps people who are going through a bad time because of the lockdowns and everything, but I do think we're finally, with the return of the light, the ball is rolling in the right direction. And I won't have to make these videos anymore because I'll be feeling better getting back to the way things were, and you'll be feeling better getting back to things the way they were, and I can go back to covering the subjects and things I talk about. But at the moment, like the other day, I had a friend who texted me last night and said, "Thank you very much for your video on Sunday. It was really phenomenal and really helped." And I said, "Well, I'll be honest with you, and it's true that I wasn't feeling the best on Sunday myself." And I made that video as much, and many of these videos are as much therapy for me as they are for you guys out there. And that's why there's some friends of mine. There's a lady called Miss Tina. She has her name on YouTube. And Miss Jane, and a friend of mine called Tina in Italy. She's Belgian. And these are people who are making videos too. They're just, they're us, they're our tribe. And more than ever, the tribe needs each other. We need each other so badly, because I can see it. I'm seeing it in real time. More and more people who are saying things like, maybe it's time to move away from the way things are. Not a great reset. This is the parallel society happening in individuals. Now remember, never going to be a collective. So don't be waiting for some Russell Brand or some fucker like that to come along and save you. I believe he's been making videos about the Great Race Reset too, and the truth is still like, Russell, he's gonna save us, this kind of stuff. And God fucking help us. And yes, so showing it in bulk. Well, there's some controversy about this. Yes, the original one is 3, like the Isle of Man, but the 4 one around different parts of Ireland, there's different ways of venerating in bulk, and there's different traditions around Bridge, and there's also different forms of this cross. The Christians do it like this, the pagans do it like this, the neo-pagans like the three-armed one. It doesn't matter, it's all the same thing. Look, the light is back. There's positive things happening in the right direction. It doesn't undo the hurt and pain and tragedies that this has brought to many people's lives, but this is life. One of the reasons that people are so terrified of the COVID is because they're not living anymore. They're not living anymore. They're sitting there all day with their mobile device in the living room, and the background of TV is on. You hate people say things like, "Oh, TV viewing is dying." It's not. It's huge. It's bigger. It's just that they don't sit down to watch TV shows like they did in the past. But the TV is still on with the fucking BBC News on it, or CNN, and they're sitting there at the phone going like this on the phone while glancing at the TV. They're totally and utterly destroyed. Their psychology is completely and utterly destroyed. But there's no hope for these people unless they can some break from it. I always said that, like, if you could reach the ones on the fence that are capable of stepping into consciousness, the best way to do it is by example, and not by misery, and not by trying to wake the masses up. None of that shit. The best way of doing that is living life on your terms, and then you become like, how come I'm terrified? I'm terrified by COVID. It's going like like a demon that's going to come in my front door and kill me, and yet this guy isn't. That's how you do it. And the thing is with these people, where they're terrified, the ones that have never lived are the ones the most afraid of death. And you've had decades of people saying you've no spirit, you've no soul. Richard Dawkins, all these scientism atheist types that flagellate Brian Cox metaphorically, and they're all like, "Well, there's no such thing as a soul. When you die, you just die." And then Sunday Covey comes on and says, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die." The same ones, because they've never really lived, and they have no sense of spiritual depth to them. They have no sense of spiritual depth to them. And that's because a lot of it has to do with the digital existence we've been in for the last probably 15 years. And I always maintain the thing that live an analog life rather than a digital existence. And the best way to do that is to have the analog life within the digital world. And that's a parallel living. So, let the light flow in. See you, bye. Take care.